LinkedIn presents.
This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with remarkable folks who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest this week is April Dominguez, a trailblazer who's leveraged her experiences to create Handsome, a career and education network for professionals. Think LinkedIn for hairdressers. April is a proud Native American and Hispanic founder who has overcome the odds and raised millions in funding and was the first recipient of the Google for Startups Latino Founders Fund. She's here to share with us the Handsome story and why she believes that hairdressers are not just stylists, but entrepreneurs who deserve respect and recognition. April, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here.
I appreciate it, April. And I want to start by going way back. And I want to get into the current state of being a Latino and Latina founder. But in 1967, my grandmother and mom and their family came to the United States from Cuba via the Freedom Flights. And I remember hearing the horror stories of my grandmother and mother working on a factory floor, being abused by coworkers, having to deal with the language barrier. And I know a lot has changed since 1967, but what's it like now in this entrepreneur tech startup ecosystem for Latino and Latinas?
Yeah, well, thank you for diving in with that very forward question. I love this topic. I think it's so important, and it's one of the most important things that we can jump immediately into. And I also really appreciate the story of your grandmother. Like, I felt that. I got the visual when you talked about it. I felt that, that was my family. Also, we're not from Cuba, but like my family is Native American and Hispanic. And so it's really interesting, this Latino conversation as well. It's put me in this dynamic of I don't actually fit into any of these buckets because by definition, Latino is it's Latin America. So it is Mexico, South America, Central America. Spain isn't necessarily considered Latin America, even though their language is of Latin descent. And so what that does is it puts a lot of founders like myself that's Native American and Hispanic in this bucket of where do I actually fit in? Where do I actually fit in? This is a conversation and an argument that I have made to a lot of VCs, to a lot of funds, to a lot of pitch competitions on their websites. They say, Latino founders apply here, the Google for Startups Latinx Latino Founder Fund. I was the first Latino founder to receive a $100,000 cash award from Google. And everyone that I've received capital from that has named it as Latino, I've said you should really open up your language to include Hispanic and to include Indigenous, because it's making people think that they don't fit into these boxes. And I'm very clear about my background and my heritage, and most of these funds are doing it subconsciously. They don't intend to exclude Indigenous or Hispanic founders, but they actually just don't know the correct terminology behind it. So I think that's like one really important aspect of it. And what's happening in the state of, for Latino founders, for Hispanic founders, what I call founders of like the underdog. So that's who I believe I represent, is the underdog. Communities of color, Native Americans, women. We, before COVID and before Black Lives Matter, we started to develop this mic. Like, we were given a platform, we were building momentum, we were starting to get on stage, and then COVID came and it wiped all of that out. And it wiped it out for minority founders across the board and Black founders as well. And the rug got pulled out from under us, because what ended up happening was the conversation shifted to, how dare I be speaking out about and against, the disparity that we're seeing in venture capital when the entire world is going through a global pandemic and people are dying. And so it felt almost like a blasphemy. Like, how could you talk about this? And then as time went on, with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, then the microphone got handed back, right? And so now it's absolutely necessary. And so the microphone got handed back, and it was being handed back to segments of people. And so initially it was to the Black founder population. And then you saw that happen with the rise of like Google for Startups Black Founder Fund 1, Google for Startups Black Founder Fund 2, Google for Startups Black Founder Fund 3. And then now you're starting to see Google for Startups Latino Founder Fund, which I was a part of last year. And so there's definitely this rise that is happening, and there's a microphone being given back, and there is intentionality being put in the fundraising. But what is literally happening right now is a similar point to what already happened during the pandemic. And that's because we're going through this market correction where they're in a market downturn. So all the risk adverseness is coming back on deck. People are pulling the microphones back out. They're pulling the capital back out. And so who do they pull it from? They pull it from minority founders. They pull it from the underdog. And we're back in this cycle that continues to happen, that anytime there's a global risk or uncertainty or something that happens, the people that get hit first are the underdog.
It's such a crazy world to live in. And I know that during the pandemic, I find one of the gross parts of the pandemic is the country was never stronger economically. Like everyone's 401ks grew during the pandemic while people were dying. Stock evaluations of companies were doubling and tripling. And it's sort of like this really dark period of our history. Yet for many people, it was great times. It was really good. These pandemic times are awesome. And now, as you mentioned, this overcorrection where you're seeing these massive companies like the Googles of the world, Amazon, like laying off hundreds of thousands of people. And like you said, the people that are going to get shortchanged are these underdogs. So you mentioned the Google startup, the Latino founder Google Startup Fund. How important was that for you in terms of growing your company? And I want to get into the company, but because since you mentioned it there, I just want to talk about like how impactful was that and what does it mean for you?
Oh, it was catalytic. It was absolutely monumental. It was huge, and so and I've developed really great relationships with the folks at Google and the community that's putting this together. And as a minority founder, as a woman founder, I often share my story with investors and I say, I have 4 to 5 strikes against me as a founder when you compare me to what people are looking for to invest in. I'm a brown founder. I'm a minority founder. I'm a female founder. I'm a non-coding founder, meaning I'm starting a tech company and I'm not a technical founder. I'm not a coding founder. And I'm building for the largest industry for women and the largest industry in diversity. And so immediately that is 4 strikes that an investor typically doesn't invest in. And in terms of the Google for Startups grant and any awards like this, it allows so much validation for your process and your experience. And it brings you to the forefront of the platform, And so what it did is it put me in front and center of the eyes of a ton of investors and validated my experience, validated my product, validated my process. And really what it is it's an opportunity for validation because all of these founders are behind the scenes. They're working, they're like busting their butts. They're doing everything that they absolutely can, but they don't get the outward visible validation that a lot of other people get. And so it opened the doors to massive amount of networks. I mean, after that, I think that I got more PR in that 2 to 3 month period following because organizations wanted to, like Refinery 29 came out and talked to me. Forbes talked to me. Like organizations wanted to talk to founders about their experience of being a Latino founder and raising capital. And so that's what Google for Startups was able to do, was actually put us front and center in the spotlight. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it changes or impacts like the growth of my business. My business is serving beauty and barber professionals and they're not necessarily reading this stuff. But what it does is it validates the experience as a founder and opens up more doors for more capital to come in.
Cool. All right. One more behind the scenes thing before we get into Handsome. And that's what over the last 3 years, interviewing female founders, minority founders, one of the sort of like, it's not a dirty little secret. It's pretty much a known secret that when you go and look for capital, raise funds, you're going to walk into a room full of white men, usually older white men. And so when someone who's a female or black or brown walks in, they don't understand the problem they're trying to fix. I always call it the entrepreneur's conundrum, find a problem, fix a problem. How tough was that for you to explain, like you mentioned, one of your 5 strikes to potential investors of how profitable and how successful Handsome could be because they couldn't understand where you were coming from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm going to take it back even further in my career because I had this really unique, interesting experience where I started off my career in an oil and gas investment startup. And I was a very early hire. I was a 5th hire. I oversaw all of our operations, our technology strategy, investor strategy. And what I implemented enabled us to raise and deploy over 130 million in joint venture capital. So I had this experience of being the right-hand woman to the CEO, who was also my mentor at the time. I was at the table, I was in the meetings, I was in the venture calls. And of 2,500 investors that we brought on during my time there, 2,498 of them were Caucasian men over the age of 65. So I had a very unique experience. I knew what it felt like to sit at the table with Caucasian men, wealthy Caucasian men, prominent Caucasian men. I knew how to enter the room. I knew how to have the conversation. It really built a level of confidence that I needed in order to enter the VC venture capital space as a startup founder. What's interesting and what caught me completely off guard is when I left that company and I no longer was under the CEO's wing and no longer working side by side him and him no longer being the entry point to the door, I was the entry point, a brown female founder. Then everything changed. The conversations changed. The understanding changed. Now I'm serving an entirely different market. It's not oil and gas. It's beauty and barbering. It was totally different. And quite honestly, it knocked me out. Like, I feel like I just got bulldozed and ran right over. And it was really unexpected because I thought that I was an exception to the rule because I'd had this experience and I had already been in the door at the right hand of my former boss and CEO. And so entering the VC landscape and really having to go through that experience, it was an initiation for sure. And having to learn how to reposition myself, re-story tell, make them understand, like, here is how big the industry is. You know, there are more hairstylists in the US than there are police officers. There are more hairstylists in the US than there are doctors. It's a $190 billion industry. You know, I have to tell stories that make them understand the importance of the industry. And that is a skill that's come over time. And it's definitely something that on my end, to be quite honest, I vet VCs as well. I go to their website, I look at their portfolio companies, I look at their team. If they don't have any women on their team, if they don't have any minorities on their team, I don't pitch them anymore. If they're a 50% of their portfolio isn't minority or female, I don't pitch them anymore. The first 2.5 years, I pitched everyone. And I needed that experience. But then I started to learn, hey, they're giving me feedback and they're shutting me down when they don't understand my market or what I'm serving. So now I'm very intentional and very specific about who I'll even open up my conversations to.
And lastly on that, is there enough people like that have that 50% threshold, that have a bit of a mix on a part of the group? Are there more of those people now available for you and folks and Latino Black people who are trying to start a company? Are there more people that are more embracing of that sort of environment?
They're definitely on the rise. They are on the rise for sure. And there's so much capital in the world. There's so much capital in the world. It is limitless. Like, the amount of capital that exists is limitless. And so it is on the rise. You know, like funds like Concrete Rose Capital, Mac Venture Capital, like these organizations, 100% of my investors from my first institutional round of funding are BIPOC or women, 100% of them, you know? And so every single person that came in that institutional round is either Black, Indigenous, person of color, or a woman on their general partners. And that's something that I'm very proud of. And so there's not as many at all. I don't even know the stats on the VC side. It's probably like 3% of VCs are people of color, but there are enough for right now, and it needs to continue to grow for sure. But that's not an excuse for founders of color to not get out there and to go after the money, because they do exist.
Awesome. All right. So I mentioned the entrepreneur's conundrum earlier, and that's find a problem, fix a problem. So what was the problem you found, and what were you attempting to fix with Handsome?
Yeah. So I mentioned a little bit about my former career, oil and gas, you know, very polar opposite experience in what I'm doing now.
Yes.
Really opposite field, opposite industry, opposite purpose, all of the things. But, you know, I have always considered myself to be a servant to the underdog. And it's always been in retrospect to see how that's come to fruition. And so an example is I received a full ride scholarship to any university globally that I got accepted to. I got accepted to some pretty prominent universities. And the one that I ended up choosing was the University of Texas at El Paso. I also got accepted to UT Austin. And I chose UTEP because it was a HSI. An HSI is a Hispanic serving institution. 90% of their students are Hispanic. I felt deeply connected to the culture, to the people, to their service, to what they were building, and quite honestly, to the underdog. At the time, I didn't know how to articulate it or what it was, but that's what drew me there. So tying that into the story of this problem and how I saw it and what happened in order for it to come to fruition, graduated university, came to Austin, started working in oil and gas, had this polar opposite career experience, really exciting, lucrative, quite honestly, sexy career experience. Working under the CEO himself. He was my mentor, taught me everything he knew, but I was never intrinsically motivated. I was acquiring all the knowledge, had all of these great opportunities, but I just didn't feel like I was helping people who look like me or came from a background like mine get any wealthier. Meanwhile, we have 2,500 investors who poured in 130 million in capital, and their gains are just going up, and they're primarily Caucasian. 98% of them are Caucasian men over the age of 65. So I left that career in pursuit of really creating something of impact for communities of color, for the underdog. And simultaneously, I'm witnessing my sister, who's been in the beauty and barber industries for the last 14 years. And she's done absolutely incredible things in the industries. She has built nationwide salon academies. She's built up salons in New York, LA, Colorado, Texas. She's literally scaled thousands of beauty professionals throughout her career. And I asked her a question, and her answer really shocked me. I asked her, how are you really going to create something for the masses in the industry? How are you going to get your education out there to everybody? Like, how are you going to shift the industry? And she was like, I don't know what you mean. I'm going to keep using the same tools I always have. I'm going to use Craigslist and Instagram. And to me, I was completely shocked because I'm coming from a polar opposite industry, like an industry that's deemed as professional, right? So I'm coming from oil and gas, technology, startups. And meanwhile, she's coming from this industry that quite honestly has a massive stigma. And the stigma is that if you are a hairstylist or a barber professional, then it's a last resort career. You only went into that profession because you didn't have any other choices. And because it's viewed as a last resort career, venture capital doesn't pour into it. They don't have the same technology resources as every other industry that exists. All these other industries have tools like LinkedIn, Behance, Dribbble, RigUp, GitHub, you name it. Meanwhile, the beauty and barber industries are forced to use Craigslist and Instagram as a career tool, even when there's more hairstylists than police officers and more hairstylists than doctors in the US. So that's how it came to fruition. And quite honestly, in that moment, immediately got to work, immediately started investigating the competitive analysis or landscape and just like diving into figuring out how can we actually create a community that's like LinkedIn, but is specific to the beauty and barber industry so that they can earn more money, learn, and actually level up in their careers faster.
That's fascinating. Any funny stories of when you were pitching this story to folks and, what kind of reaction you got from people?
Well, I actually pitched Mark Cuban once, and I pitched Mark Cuban on a whim. It was not scheduled. I heard that he was at Bob's Steakhouse in Austin. My husband, who was my partner at the time, texted me and he was like, Mark Cuban is here. And I was like, stop. So I had just got done on a 5-mile run, just slicked my hair back. I was very sweaty. I walk in Bob's Steakhouse. Mark Cuban is sitting there by himself. And I was like, this is my chance. Like, I have to pitch Mark Cuban. So I walked straight up to his table and I said, Mark, I just have 3 questions for you and I'll leave you alone. And he was like, okay. And he told me to sit down. All the restaurant staff came to try and get me away, to protect his privacy. And he was like, it's fine, let her sit down. He was very kind. And I just asked him, my very first question was, when was the last time you got a haircut? And he was like, 3 days ago. And I was like, how long have you been seeing your barber? And he was like, 22 years. I was like, who taught your barber what they do? When was the last education they took? And he was like, I have no idea. It just opened up this can of worms of a conversation that a whole world of education and hairstyling and barbering that he had never even thought about. And I started to share the stats that hairstylists and barbers spend $5,000 to $10,000 annually on education and up-leveling their careers. And people don't actually know how to become a celebrity barber or celebrity artist, and they're very fragmented. And so I've found very unique, creative ways to ask and position questions to investors, even and bald investors, that like they have wives, they have sons, they're connected to the industry in some way. And so I've actually found that every single investor has been connected in some way. They have a wife, they have a daughter that's gone to cosmetology school, and they can all relate on some level.
It's awesome. And this sort of reminds me about a friend of mine who a couple of years ago had this startup that was geared towards dentistry. And I thought, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I mean, I wasn't a dentist, but it sounded like a pretty cool idea. So I ended up going to my dentist. We're going for a cleaning or something like that. And I brought up the idea of this startup and I said, does this sound like something you'd be into? And he's like, no, not at all. I mean, I get referrals. My patients refer me to other patients. This doesn't seem like something I would really be interested in. And it got me thinking, like, oh boy, my friend's got this startup here for dentists. And here's this really kind of hip, cool dentist who's pretty tech savvy and doesn't see a value in this product. So the question is here, do hairstylists today see a value in the Handsome app?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a very, those are the same questions that I get from investors all the time. And
I'm so predictable. I'm sorry, April.
It's all good. It's all good. You know what you're doing. You know what to ask. And so Handsome, one thing I'm really proud of in our company culture is we've really built a culture around customer interviews and user feedback. So we look at who's using our product, even people who've opened the app and never come back, and we bring them into a conversation on a weekly basis and sometimes multiple times a week. And we learn and study from them. And we ask them, what is the biggest challenge you're facing? Why did you come to Handsome app? Like what were you expecting to get? Was there anything that you didn't receive? And so we have a lot of those conversations first and foremost with the industry itself. But the feedback from the industry, it's very clear when you actually look at social media as well. There is a really large group of what I call hairfluencers. So they're really well-known hair people in the industry. And everyone is talking about how they are so frustrated with Instagram. They are so bored in the industry. They don't know how to get to the next phase in their career. Instagram made it so that you can become a good hairstylist or a world-renowned educator just by likes, but you may actually be a horrible educator. You may not actually be good at teaching and educating, but you can have a massive following. And so there's no credibility that's being built, and the industry sees that. And so I would say what we're actually really exceptionally great at is we have nailed brand market fit and industry market fit. The people that we work within the industry, from educators to brands and mentors, are all really excited about a new modern day platform that's not built around social media likes, but that's actually standardized and built around like leveling up in their careers. So that's definitely the feedback that we get. There is also, you'll always have segments of people who it's not for them, and there are hairstylists that have been doing it for 40 years and they don't want to download a new app. And I get that. I don't want to download TikTok, so,
And I'm also curious. I mean, I feel like that congressman that asked Mark Zuckerberg, how does Facebook make money? And then he's like, ads. So what are the revenue streams for Handsome?
Yeah. So we actually, the first several years, we follow the same business strategy of other vertical networks. So I'm talking about like LinkedIn, Quora, Reddit. And what that means is we focus really hard on building a big community and a really engaged community first. And so we have 45,000 members in our community today, very engaged. We just surpassed over 600,000 actions in the platform. We grew 360% last year on our engagement, nearly 100% on our user growth last year. And so we've been really intentionally focused on building a community, build the engagement. Step 3 is to monetize. And that's where we're at right now. And so the first monetization avenue that we're really excited about, and we've been seeing a lot of success, is through mentorships. So we connect the industry one-to-one with a virtual mentorship. As an example, we work with Snoop Dogg's barber, Dr. Dre's barber, an array of other celebrity artists and barbers, and they come on the platform, they record audio education, and they also are mentors. And so when they get a mentorship booking, Handsome takes a cut. We take it's a 10 to 30% cut. So that's avenue 1, is a very direct take rate of supplying the marketplace for mentors to educate other professionals. And then as we expand and grow, we also have subscription models in place and ways where the professional can actually monetize on their own group that they're creating within the platform. So there's a long pipeline and roadmap of monetization in the future, but right now the primary one is through mentorships.
Cool. There's something that Handsome offers called something like microdose education.
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So microdoses are micro audio education. It's education served up in 3 minutes or less. We did this very intentionally. The industry works on their feet. Their cell phone is their business tool. 70% of them don't own laptops. They have 3 minutes between clients, 3 minutes to get to the back bar, 3 minutes when they get their coffee. So they're moving at a really rapid pace, and they don't have a lot of time to sit down and watch education on YouTube for an hour at a time. And so we created what we call microdoses, and we worked again with the industry's biggest names in barbers and stylists and educators. And they create a series of microdoses on how to upsell your clients in 3 minutes or less, how to fire your client in 3 minutes or less, how to stay motivated and inspired in the industry, how to become a celebrity barber, how Snoop's barber got to where he was in 3 minutes or less. And that's been a really powerful mechanism in order for us to work with brands as well, because we couple that with brand education and brand products. And we've seen a lot of growth and a lot of success working with brands alongside the microdoses also.
And out of curiosity, what does your sister think of all this now that she was sort of part of she was part of the genesis of what Handsome turned out to be? But what is the feedback? Because as we all know, family's our toughest critic. And also our biggest fan, but they're usually our toughest critic. What does your sister think about the Handsome app?
Yeah, well, she's been a supporter and advocate from day one. In that very first moment when I mentioned it to her and I said, why aren't you on LinkedIn? Why isn't there a LinkedIn for the industry? Like, her very first reaction was, April, that would never work for the industry, which I think just goes to show that there has to be this outside perspective that brings it in as well. And she's a huge advocate, huge supporter. We worked together on the business for the first 2.5 years. And so she is infused in the inspiration, infused in the vision. And she brought a lot of her energy and effort to the business also. And so, yeah, she's still a cheerleader, still like cheering us on and wants us to make it all the way to the end zone. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So we opened the conversation by talking about the past and present. What is the future of entrepreneurship for Latinas? Does it look brighter from your, because you're breaking new ground here, especially since you mentioned you're a tech entrepreneur that's not a coder. You are a path for folks to follow that probably were like, man, I could never be a tech entrepreneur because I don't know how to write tech. I don't have a engineering degree. But now that there's folks like yourself that are opening up a huge path for the next generation, what does the future look like for them?
Yeah, I think that the future is very non-traditional, and we're seeing all of these traditional frameworks being broken down right now. And so what's happening is that previously, when the only people that really started businesses were people who were smart enough or actually could afford to go to Harvard or Stanford, and then they were able to, come up with an idea and build it at Stanford in their dorm room, and then raise a couple million in funding. And those people all look the same. It's the same demographic. And so I think that the future and what's happening now, and you can see it, is that the more you can see it, the more that you can be it. And that's really important to me. And what's happening is that people who are veterans, who didn't go to university, people who grew up very poor, economically disadvantaged, immigrants. There are so many funds for immigrants now to raise capital. And these people they are some of the most resourceful, gritty, like hardworking people that exist because they have been fighting their entire lives, And so before, they were fighting for smaller things because they thought that was the only avenue that they could go to. They were fighting for salons, barbershops, food trucks, like cleaning shops and all these things. And now, like, these people are starting to realize, oh, I can start something really big. I can have a big dream. I can do something bigger than what's in my backyard, and I can put my resources towards that. And so I really believe that the future of what's happening in the minority population is that there's an uprising right now of people coming to the table. It's very clear with the stats. You can see the number of founders, the number of female founders that are coming to the table. There is no lack in the amount of female founders and minority founders out there. There's a lack of capital out there for them. And so I think we're in a beautiful uprising, and there's going to be a shift. Texas just reached 40%, the majority population is now Hispanic. The numbers were ran in 2021, but it just got confirmed by Congress this year. And so like Texas, we are now the majority in the state of Texas. And I think that it's really exciting, and we're on this uprising, and I'm all about it.
Sweet. And lastly, you being in tech, living in Austin, you're fully aware of the AI conversation. And one of the things that's funny, talking to you, and obviously AI plays a part in your back end of Handsome and how you're operating, but your target customer will not be replaced by AI. Like it's what, we've all talked about all these jobs that AI is going to replace. Man, there's no way that ChatGPT is going to be able to cut my hair. So for you, the future looks bright in terms of the folks that you have that will be coming onto your app. They're not going anywhere. They're only going to grow and more willing to want to be part of a LinkedIn community online. So that must make you feel good at the end of the day that AI ain't going to get in your way.
Yeah. And you know what, to be honest, like I have not been worried about AI at all for a minute in terms of our industry, but it's an interesting conversation because this topic has gone up a lot outside of AI. When COVID hit and when there's a recession and there is that famous saying, it's like it's the lipstick effect, right? And so the lipstick effect is that even during recessions and during depressions, women still buy their lipstick because they want to look good and they want to feel good. And it's the same thing when it comes to hairstyling. Like during recession, like hairstyling is a recession-proof industry. And so we have actually year after year after year been asked the same similar question. It's not in terms of AI, but like in terms of recessions and COVID and all of this stuff. And even with COVID, what we saw was Nancy Pelosi is in her garage illegally paying her hairstylist to cut her hair when salons were shut down for 8 months in California. That was huge. It was such a huge proof point to look, the industry is not going anywhere. They're working out of their garages. They're working out of their apartments. They're going to do personal cuts and colors, and it's not going anywhere. If anything, what's happening is that there's actually such an influx of the human population that there actually needs to be more hairstylists and more barbers to service the amount of people.
Her name is April Dominguez. She is the founder and CEO of Handsome. April, thank you again so much for the time. I really appreciate it, and it's really exciting. It's really inspiring, the story behind Handsome, and I'm really looking forward to the future.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. And that'll do it for another episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you'll get new episodes as soon as they're available. And if you have a spare moment, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review, which would help other exceptional entrepreneurs like you discover the show. You can always connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.